Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. For those of us working in manufacturing, we're going to have a crisis. No matter what we do to prepare, we're used to change and it happens. What I see in manufacturing often, it's how we communicate that crisis. It's how we plan for it or not plan for it. How we do that can impact how people feel and respond. We talk a lot about engagement and how we show up impacts that. That's how we communicate. Today's guest knows what it means to lead through chaos. I'm not talking just about a bad day on the production line. Angela Billings spent over 20 years as a strategic communicator with the U.S. Air Force, and now she's the author of Command the Crisis. We first connected through the NSA Kentucky chapter, and right away I saw the link. Like, Angela, your lessons in crisis readiness, communication, leadership under pressure, that's exactly what manufacturing needs. And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Trevor. It is certainly a pleasure to be with you this morning. We've had this on the books for a little while, and I appreciate you carving out some time so that we can talk about how important it is to anticipate a crisis before it happens, so that once it does, because as you know, it
Yeah.
will, you can actively manage it and own it so that your company and you individually are a better manager, leader, or frontline operator as a result of a crisis presenting itself.
Yeah, and often, Angela, when we're focused on safety, quality, productivity, it's like get to the next task, right? We get focused on the
Yeah.
task, and sometimes we have a hard time zooming out and saying, what do we need to communicate and how? And whether that's quality spill, it could be an injury. We really hope
Yes.
that never happens. But there's maybe an old thinking in our industry sometimes where it's like we don't want to say everything right away and
Mhm.
until we got all the information right. And I think that's where you can help us understand when to communicate, how much, how do we prepare. And reading your book, I just had so many ties to manufacturing. It's like, oh yeah, as a plant manager, as a team leader, we could do things a little bit different. But when I first met you, I saw you on stage speaking, a beautiful speaker, and you told a story. I have to have you share that with the listeners. I think it'll be a good context of what makes you an expert in this area. You have a career that I'm just amazed by.
Well, thank you very much, Trevor. I guess, I went into a high risk career
Yeah.
and as someone involved with the Air Force and national defense, I chose a high risk career path in public affairs or public relations where I've had a lot of opportunity to speak about crises. And the one in particular that you're referring to, September 11th, 2001.
Mhm.
It was a clear day, and I was at the Pentagon. As I made my way up the steps, I noticed how they'd been worn smooth by the millions who had trudged up them ahead of me.
Mm.
I skipped up them like a schoolgirl. I was so excited because that day I had my first interview with a general officer that I had done the research for and I'd prepared. So I had worked with the reporter and scoped the interview, and I was beyond excited. And so we had our regular spin up, our morning meeting. And then just before 9 o'clock, reports came over the television that a plane had flown into one of the Twin Towers in New York. Now, I had already had to work a plane crash in a previous assignment. So I immediately started to think, well, what kind of a plane? Why was it in downtown Manhattan? How do
Mhm.
you fly? What kind of incident took place inside that cockpit that would cause a crash like this? So I had come to the front of our Air Force press desk where we monitored all the news and was watching on the television as that second plane flew into the second tower. And I knew that this was not an accident, that this had to be a deliberate act. And in America, our society, our country was under attack. So I'd gone back to my desk and was processing what was taking place when the reporter for that interview called me and said, Angela, with what's going on in New York, is this interview still going to happen? And I said, well, I don't know. Let me call the general's office and I'll call you right back. And no sooner than I put the phone in the cradle than the third plane hit the Pentagon. That building, 33 million square feet, shook from left to right. And I saw the metal blinds as they banged against the window pane. And then I just immediately ducked under my desk. Instinct
Mhm.
threw me to do that. Moments later, recognizing that I was intact, but we had to get out of the building. And so we began, me and the other 25,000 people stationed at the Pentagon began spilling out of their nearest exit. Thick black smoke pouring out over top of the river entrance where I was departing. And then I heard chopper blades cutting through the air. I ducked again because I
Yeah.
thought, oh, well, this is the second wave. They're going to get the rest of us on the way out of the building. Trying to get my wits about myself and find people that I recognized. I did, others who worked on the desk with me. And then we're like, okay, we're going to go to 24-hour operations. This is an attack that we had not anticipated. I was to go home and plan to come back to work the night shift. As it turned out, everything was at a standstill. The
Mhm.
point of impact stopped traffic and emergency responders to rescue those in the plane and in the building. Tragically, we lost hundreds of lives that day in the Pentagon.
25,000 people.
That's what it had capacity to. In this particular instance, the Pentagon was under a renovation plan, and
Mm.
we had one fifth of the pie. Those people had been dispatched to Crystal City nearby and were working out of Crystal City, and that happened to be the point of impact. Fortunately, had those people been in the building, the death toll would have been much greater.
Mm. Yeah, and you had a coworker that you were talking that said you could be next, right?
Well, yeah.
Like that I read that in the book and it's kind of like just put chills down my back, like the way that, just how everything happened and yeah,
It was surreal.
yeah.
Certainly didn't anticipate that. If there was a plan for it, I didn't know about it. And so that is, one of the learning points from this. When you're presented with a crisis, your entire organization needs to know what their role is. What
Mm.
do they need to do or not do? What do they need to say? Who needs to say? So, I kind of call it a quick reaction force. When there is a crisis in a plant, there's an injury, no matter what level of the organization you fall in, you need to know what your role is. Who do you notify? How do you
Mhm.
render aid to the individual? And how do you communicate that up the chain of command? Being in the military, chain of command is very important to me. And I suspect that in a manufacturing plant, that's also very important. So knowing who is on that crisis response team, the plant manager, the supervisor, wherever the incident took place. Likely you have some legal representation who might be a part of that initial conversation, and your communicator, both internally as well as externally to your organization. You need to have a structure, a framework for communicating that everybody knows. In my current role with the Senate, we use GroupMe as a way
Mhm.
to, that quick, hey, we've got to get together, or in my case, there's a meeting that's happening and we need you to come quickly. We couldn't find you, you weren't in your office, you were doing an interview or whatever. And so having a process in place, a communication, whatever it might be, whatever works for your organization, having that in place so that everyone is connected. And then, so that's for the internal element of it. And then externally, we all have a web page. We all have, in my case, we issue news releases. We post information on X, Facebook, and Instagram. And so for each organization, there's the internal component, and then there's also that external component as well.
Mhm. And I think for most people listening to this podcast is that they're going to be thinking about like, what do I got to deal with today?
Mhm.
And what's resonating with me is for manufacturing, everything's happening quick. We have a chain of command: team member, team leader, supervisor, manager, plant manager, maybe vice president. And we want those communications to be tight. What's really resonating is the whole concept of just being connected, because in manufacturing we're moving towards more autonomous workforce, right? So we
Yeah.
want supervisors to make more decisions. We want team leaders to be empowered to make more decisions. But that doesn't work if we haven't done the proactive work ahead of time to get connected. And that's what I kind of take out of your book and some of the work that you've done. And I can imagine that you're helping other companies with that.
Mhm.
So when we're talking about preparing for that chaos, the question I had was like, what does proactive crisis planning actually look like in a fast-paced production environment, right? So what's your suggestion to us as internal buildings of being proactive?
Sure. So you can think through what's your most likely situation that would present a crisis and what's your worst case scenario, and kind of war game it, talk even to a tabletop kind of exercise. So this is the most likely things that would happen in our plant, where there's an injury or a cyber attack that might impact the flow of information. So think through that. And for the communication person, I'm going to have a framework in this instance. Here's who, what, where, when, why. These kind of questions ask around that, and kind of put that framework in place and have a process by which I, as the communicator, work with that frontline supervisor and the manager. We all have an understanding that an injury is a crisis in the making.
Mm-hmm.
First, so you want to render aid to those who might be injured, and then look at that process and what happened that caused that injury, fix the problem before it happens, refine that process so that it doesn't happen again. And, recognizing that is a potential crisis, because if the organization doesn't behave in the proper way and improve upon their process, then that can become a very public crisis. And you
Absolutely.
you want to be able to own that if that is the case, and prevent misinformation from being presented in a public way, and presenting factual information that protects your business, your brand, your product.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think with manufacturing, let's say an average plant, let's say it has, ideal size of like 150 people, but a lot of them are 500 people.
Okay.
It varies. And those are the messengers to the community, right? And the
Absolutely.
grocery stores and the cookouts and the how's it
Well,
going at your company, right? So
and
that
everybody has one of these
everyone has a cell phone and
and
an
is
app and
connected on all those social media platforms.
yeah.
It can be positive, but there's
Hmm.
also an element of negativity where every individual is an ambassador for
Yeah.
your plant.
So I think the trend that I see in manufacturing is that I believe in North America, we're getting better, a long way to go, but on that root cause, right? Like if it's a quality spill, if it's a safety issue, if it's a
Right.
downtime, like
Right.
we know how to solve that problem. And in the disciplined plants, they can do that. In the companies, whether it's logistics, construction, they can do that.
Right.
Where I don't see the progress is the intentionality of training our leaders on like, this is what resonates with you is that what's your role in the communication, right? And then what's the escalation time period? How long before we escalate? And I've talked to great companies that just aren't clear. So when do you go up the totem pole? When do we make that more clear? You guys must have had clear expectations on who gets called and how long.
Absolutely. And as I moved around in the Air Force and you sign into a base, like for instance, before I was at the Pentagon, I was in Alaska at Elmendorf Air Force Base. When you sign into the organization, there's a checklist of things you need to go do. And so your onboarding process should have a communication element to it.
Mhm.
And so that the individual coming on board, no matter what level they are entering the organization, understands where they fit and knows who to call or who to talk to when a situation presents itself. Whenever somebody gets a call from a member of the media, If there's a reporter who calls you, frontline manager, what are you going to do? Are you going to tell your communications representative at your plant, whether it's your VP of communication, chief communication, if a reporter calls you and wants a comment about how you run things at the plant or wants an opinion about your competition, perhaps you should notify your communications chief so that you can present the best information, the most factual information. As a communication professional, we go through media training with our executives. Currently, with the senators that I work with, I have a media training program that is on a different scale than what I did at the Pentagon.
Hmm.
Pentagon's media training program was extensive, three
Oh yeah.
hours. Any organization should have some degree of here's how we behave. We
Hmm.
have an opportunity to interact with the public that we are serving, the clients that we are serving, or in manufacturing, the customers who are receiving your product.
We spend money in training and manufacturing. We do. Like there's statistics out there on how much money is being spent. But what you said is about those behaviors. It's investing ahead of time to say, this is how we would communicate if someone externally called us. Even if we dial it back, this is how we communicate internally. I think we're falling a little bit in certain organizations, missing that opportunity. If I'm better prepared to do that internally, I would be better prepared to do that externally. What's my
Absolutely.
language? And just spending that little bit of time, but it seems like we got to make parts and then we got to get this out and then we've got to launch, we've got to change over, we got to hire these people, we got to get them onboarding needs to be sped up. And it's like, no, we got to go slow to go fast. If we just spent a little bit of time, imagine that whole trickle effect of how that message goes through the plant. And one of the lines that I liked of yours was, you know, not communicating, it's an option, right? Like no
It
comments an
is.
option.
Sure.
And I forget the exact words, but it was basically like you're now giving the opportunity, you've created this void in communication. Now, any member in your plant or even outside could fill that void and create a story that isn't accurate. You
Absolutely.
failed to deliver the story yourself.
Recognizing that that there's a crisis opportunity. That's what a crisis is. It's where risk meets opportunity. And so diving into that and saying, we are going to own our narrative, we are going to tell our story
Hmm.
is the crux of what I present to leaders across all industries. If you don't tell your story, somebody else will, and they won't have all those facts, and they won't certainly represent you the best. I, as a spokesperson, can work with a subject matter expert on
Hmm.
what the process is, the quality we put into our products, and the time we invest in training those who work in our plant. Investing early on lays the groundwork for success. Knowing your process internally and invigorating the communications expert inside your organization, your plant manager, your vice president, all the way up the chain, recognizing that owning that story is where you protect your business, you protect your brand.
I like that. Just protecting our brand because it could be as simple, Angela, as overtime gets canceled with short notice.
Sure.
So we got choices, right? We could either just say, yeah, overtime's canceled, and then that's it. And then that creates this whole frustration and narrative.
Why was it canceled? Are you
Yeah,
communicating that to the people inside the plant?
we can, but
You
oftentimes we
could.
don't. And I want your opinion on this too. In manufacturing and all these connected industries, we have kickoff meetings in the morning. They just feel like a lot of times like missed opportunities. What's your thoughts on saying, hey, here, Trevor, you're the team leader. Here's some information, what's going on. Let your team know this versus I want you to read this script to the team. What's your opinion on like, should it be scripted and people should be reading off a piece of paper when it's important communication, or should we
Uh,
just give them the bullet points and let them explain it?
I think that probably bullet points would work and then engaging in that conversation. So it's not just a one-way communication. I do the same thing with my team. We have a morning spin up where
Okay.
we talk about what's going on today. Here's what's in the news today that we need to interject into. For the plant manager, absolutely. That is an opportunity where you've got everyone's attention. You're all right there in the room together. You can take 30 seconds to a minute and simply reinforce your communication process, who to
Mm,
call if there is a member of the media looking for a
yeah.
comment. Let's talk about your social media platforms. Different companies engage in different ways.
Yeah.
Are you on Instagram? Very visual. Do you have a YouTube channel? Many
Hmm.
businesses do. Video is such a powerful way to tell a story, much like we're doing right now.
Yes, we are.
Leveraging a YouTube platform is a smart thing for a company to do. You can put all your training right there if you wanted to.
Oh, I started this podcast in 2019 and I had a harder time getting manufacturing leaders to come on because they're like, that would have to go through corporate and because they're concerned of the legal problems that they could
Sure.
come on this podcast.
I hear that a
But
lot.
but I find that 6 years later, it's really shifted. More companies are getting out on YouTube, but more companies are getting out because recruitment, you want to be known, right? Like, what, who
Yes.
wouldn't want to come on my podcast and talk about how great their company is? That's why I'm thinking that. But now I understand the balance, and maybe those companies are more comfortable with the fact of, hey, you know what? We've equipped Angela. She knows she can go on the podcast.
When I speak with industry leaders, I emphasize three things that are really important. One is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. We all have the same amount of time. So having a sense of urgency when a crisis presents itself.
Yes.
Big opportune time to do that. And then the last thing that we've touched on already is stepping into that crisis and owning that story. Those are the three key elements leaders inside of manufacturing have come to recognize and have embraced that and certainly can leverage the platforms that exist now to improve communications inside their organization as well as reaching outside of the organization with that recruitment element and brand presentation and reputation, holding up that great reputation that you as manufacturers have built over years.
Hmm.
You absolutely want to protect that and present that to the public that you serve, the customers that you serve.
If you're running a warehouse or manufacturing plant or any type of or construction site, anything like that today, take a fraction of the urgency that you put in when the line's down and when you're not making parts and you got a tight shipment, take a fraction of that urgency and put it into your communication. That's what your point number two just hit my heart. We got to focus on getting the line up, but it's an and, it's not an or. Someone needs to be able to communicate. So you mentioned technology there, and we're wrapping up, but I do have to ask this. You said
Sure.
GroupMe you used with your own group. Where do you see technology? Like, where's the opportunity in technology where manufacturing plants should be thinking more about communicating differently than just scripts at a shift kicked off?
So, inside your organization, whatever your leadership determines is an effective way to communicate quickly, uh,
Hmm.
embrace that and make that kind of part of that onboarding process so that, like I did mention GroupMe earlier. Signal is another app that I leverage with smaller groups. We use that because it gives some structure to work communication that is separate from messages you get from
Hmm.
family members or friends, and that's
Yeah.
kind of the social aspect of it. But leveraging so many platforms that are available that you carry with you, you have to turn the notifications on too. You can't not do that. Right?
But then it's the team member's choice, right? Of how do they want to be communicated to. Just looking at what technology can we use that we take away the excuses of we don't have time to let everybody know, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
just
Yeah.
get everybody on the same page and let them know. When I read some of the stories and the case studies you put in your book, it's kind of like, man, you think that these big corporations got it all figured out. And then they don't talk to the media. As a Canadian, Justin Trudeau is our prime minister. I try to support whoever's in power. I want everyone to do well. When we had the big issue in Ottawa with all the truckers, I just wanted him to come out on the street and talk. I thought
And
everything's going to
yes,
be fine. And then he didn't. And then I
right.
waited and
It's
I
painful.
got a lot of people that complain about the politics. I just want everyone to be successful, whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're a politician. I want you to communicate. I want you, let's have the deeper conversation and everything will work out.
Right.
When we don't communicate, it's hard to manage a crisis if you haven't prepared for it. The time's gone by so fast. What do you want to leave the listeners with today?
I want them to feel empowered to step into their story and own a crisis. Treat it as an opportunity to protect your brand, your product, your company, and own that story, own that narrative with pertinent factual information presented in a timely manner to manage that crisis, to command that crisis. At whatever level in the organization you may work, you are empowered to do that. You should be asking questions. If you don't know what
Yes.
you're supposed to say or do, you should be asking your supervisor. So, what would I do if a reporter called me?
Yeah.
What should we do with this downtime that we have? Is there something that I might be able to read in order to improve my mind and improve the brand? As a professional, you should feel empowered to step in and step up and say, I want to know what our process is. I want to know what our policy is. And I need to know who I need to call when there is a
Mm,
crisis.
that is, Angela, you're just what manufacturing needed to hear today. How do the listeners best follow you?
They can go to my website, The Virago Circles, the name of my business. A Virago is a heroic or brave woman, and I got a military background, and that's why I
Mm,
have the Virago Circle. You can find me on LinkedIn. I have a number of products that your listeners may find useful. I have a pre-crisis checklist that
mm,
says, here's some things you can do to think about those crises that you're likely to be presented with. I have a post crisis checklist. I also have a crisis decision matrix that may help you determine if you are in a crisis. That is both in my book and on my website. I'm on Amazon. You can find my book on Amazon. I'd love for you to read it, like Trevor has. And I'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, Angela at theviragocircle.com. You can leave a review on Amazon. I'd love to hear how you've been able to apply what I've given you in Command the Crisis in your industry.
Wonderful. And on my website will be your book report as well. People can
My
read my
gosh.
take on it and how I connected it to manufacturing. Thank you for writing this book and helping other industries because we can learn from each other and coming on the podcast today. I appreciate Angela.
Oh, Trevor, this has been a delight, and the time just whizzed by. There's so much more we didn't get a chance to talk about. I'm also available for speaking engagements at your next manufacturing conference as we all look to improve our profession. Stay connected, and I can't wait to read your book report.
Right on. Thanks, Angela. We'll have the links on the podcast notes and appreciate you.
Thank you too, Trevor. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.